Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to Marcel and Bitcoin Dada for having me on and featuring me as part of her Bitcoin story. It's so fun and such an honor to be here. My name is Ayelen Osorio, and I am the writer of the Misfit newsletter and podcast host of the Misfit podcast. I'm based in Canada as well, and have been in Bitcoin for, I think now, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I think it all started maybe when I was little. I've always been curious about people. I used to annoy my parents a lot because I asked a lot of questions. And when I got into high school, I was very much an average student, but my teachers would always say that I was very curious. And by the time I got to university, I studied psychology because I've always been fascinated by people. I want to know everything about people. I want to know what they're thinking about, what their struggles are, what their triumphs are, why they believe the things that they believe, how do they come to find solutions to the problems they have. I'm very fascinated by people, and I think that by asking questions, you can not only come to understand them, but also come to gain a lot of insight and wisdom from their life that you can take over to your own personal life. So I've always been interested about the individual and how that individual person fits into their community and society, and and just broader humanity as well. And my interest in Bitcoin started mainly because I have grown up in different countries and seen a lot of the ways that people are oppressed. And when I learned about Bitcoin and the way that it could safeguard your wealth, in the way that you could take it with you wherever you needed to move to if you were being oppressed. When I heard that and I heard the stories and the lessons from Bitcoiners in the space, it was a no-brainer for me. It made sense. It fit into my own lived experiences traveling around the world, and it fit in with that mission of wanting to understand and help people. Oh gosh. I don't think I was inspired as much as I was compelled to write. I felt that I had to write, and I didn't know what I needed to write about. So I decided I would just show up and I would write week after week. And after writing a few newsletters, and each week the topic was very different, it was a bit all over the place. I realized that, and looking back, I realized that I had a pattern, and that pattern was to tell stories, to tell real stories of people that were in search of freedom, and particularly financial freedom. And then I started to explore, well, is Bitcoin helping these people? Is it not? And how is it helping? And, for one person, that help might be just that it's helping them escape hyperinflation. For another person, it might be that they were being targeted by the government simply because they worked for the previous government that was a different political party. And so then now the current government was coming after them. They feared their wealth would be taken away from them, so they turned to Bitcoin. So these stories really highlighted that interest in how Bitcoin is a tool to help people gain financial freedom and help protect their human rights. And so what started as just this calling almost to write later turned into my craft, telling me what I was passionate about and how I wanted to continue down that path and figure out ways how that I can help people onboard to Bitcoin so that they can also find their financial freedom. So it's been a really, really interesting journey of a lot of trusting. It's been very rewarding. Oh my gosh. I have done a few profile newsletters or profile features for my newsletter. And I try and feature people that I believe live on the margin, that I believe have been unfairly punished by our systems. I want to tell their stories. and highlight. And every person that I've met has been so impactful. I mean, there was, as an example, a Venezuelan gentleman living in Venezuela's hyperinflation, not able to afford eating. So he would eat once a day, and then he would walk a few miles every day to get to work. And no matter how much he earned, he was losing his life saving because of the inflation in Venezuela. And it got to the point that he wasn't able to survive, literally and physically survive in Venezuela, because he was disintegrating as a human being because of the economic mismanagement of Venezuela. That he decided to pack a backpack, just to not make it obvious, but pack a backpack and travel through Central America to the United States and cross the border. He had to pay for someone to help him cross the border, and was incredibly afraid and wondering, oh my gosh, am I going to get trafficked, murdered? Like, there were so many fears. And eventually he made it to Venezuela. But it was really interesting to hear what he thought about Bitcoin, and how to him Bitcoin wasn't a big deal. It was money. He didn't need convincing when he was living in Venezuela and experiencing the hyperinflation. He didn't need convincing that Bitcoin was going to work for him. It was a solution that he got right away. It made sense, and he started to adopt Bitcoin just to be able to have some money in a country where his own currency was deflating. And as he says, I know there's volatility with Bitcoin, but at least it trends up. So it was really interesting to see how for him Bitcoin helped just him access money that wasn't being debased and devalued on a daily basis. That was an impactful story that I interviewed and wrote about. And it was also pretty special because when I sent him the story, he was moved to tears, because it is one thing to live in so much pain and in so much suffering, and then to read your story, to be told your story right back at you. It felt for him that he was validated, and that all his fight and his faith, it wasn't in vain, that it mattered. And it mattered to me, and it mattered to the other readers that that they were reading his story and being inspired by him and wanting to help him and send him Bitcoin and wanting to help learn more about the situation in Venezuela. And so that was pretty impactful. And that's why I believe that storytelling is a really effective tool in just changing the narrative around Bitcoin. I think part of the reason of why Bitcoin is difficult to understand is because we focus a lot on data and technical analysis of Bitcoin. But I think stories and storytelling have a really powerful way of being proof to somebody that Bitcoin works, and that it's saving lives to the people that need it most. So that was a story that was really moving. I think another one was interviewing my mother as well. And she was a stay-at-home mom. And when my dad passed away, she didn't speak English. She hadn't worked. She didn't manage the finances. And so I was really interviewing her to learn about her story and how, do you begin to learn about banking, and how do you begin to learn to manage the inheritance and money and lawyers, and while grieving, and how do you decide the future of your children and how you're going to budget for that while again grieving and being heartbroken and trying to put one foot in front of the other. It was really special as a woman to then interview my mom on such an important matter. And we talked about Bitcoin as well. And in the end, she said, please help me get Bitcoin, and please help my friends get into Bitcoin. So that was really special and rewarding, and special for our relationship as well. I guess an unusual moment, which isn't necessarily unusual, but really special. Again, on the newsletter, I focus on real stories of people in search of financial freedom, and specifically through the lens of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin can help them. And it's similarly aligned to the work that the Human Rights Foundation is doing with Bitcoin and the theme of financial freedom. So when Alex Gladstein, he's a chief strategy officer at the Human Rights Foundation, wrote to me and asked me if I wanted to MC the financial freedom track of the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is a human rights conference put together by the Human Rights Foundation. I was beyond honored. I was so touched and so honored. It meant everything to me. It made my whole entire year. Um, but I was also a bit nervous, but I knew I had to say yes. So I said yes, and just, dealt with the nerves, and but also the excitement. So that was unusual, just to see what the work that I'd done, right? Like the work that I was putting in every week start to pay off. And it was really, really cool to see the passion and love that I've poured into the newsletter turn into emceeing a whole day on the theme of financial freedom, and introducing some of my favorite Bitcoiners in the space, and including activists and um, people, political prisoners, or human rights lawyers, or really anybody that is a believer in Bitcoin, and educating the masses around the human rights side of Bitcoin. So that was unusual, but very, very special. And I'm eternally grateful to Alex for that opportunity. That is very special to me. The myths I most often encounter, I would say I'm based in Canada. So a lot of the conversations and questions people still have are really around like Bitcoin isn't real money, and it's just a scam. And I think that they might think I'm a scammer. I'm not even sure. But for me, I debunk them by telling the stories I write about. And that's why, again, writing these stories has been helpful in my own education as well, because then I can say, well, actually, for this gentleman in Venezuela, Bitcoin was real money, and he found people to uh, trade or buy products with Bitcoin. Or for this person who was being hunted by the government, well, he was able to pull out his life savings and turn it into Bitcoin, so that the government wasn't going to take it away from him when they were trying to persecute him. Or for this person, it was just a safe haven, a refuge. They were a refugee, and it was, they couldn't bring their money, their belongings with them, but they were able to access Bitcoin and then tap into a financial network there. So I think when you have those real stories, and they're real stories, and they're not necessarily just, oh, well, the price prediction of Bitcoin is this, or they're expected to reach this price by this year. Or actually, if you look at historical data stuff, that you can argue. But what you can't argue is somebody's lived experience. So to me, I debunk them by saying, hey, this isn't what I think, and this isn't what I believe. This is what other people think and what they believe. And these are people from everywhere, from Venezuela, from Panama, from South Africa. It could be wherever, right? And so I think that does a better job of convincing people that Bitcoin is good. That's a very good question. I feel like I'm never on top of Bitcoin content. That's something I struggle with, and sometimes if I'm honest, it stresses me out. Bitcoin is so broad and so deep; it is impossible to know every aspect of Bitcoin, and especially because every time there are more and more articles and more tutorials and videos and podcasts and documentaries, the list goes on. It's overwhelming. I have decided that I have a finite amount of energy and curiosity. Otherwise, I will burn out. So I have decided that I'm going to focus on one part, and I'm going to do it well. And that is to focus on the intersection between Bitcoin and human rights, between political freedom and financial freedom. And that's the arena that I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to trust that my fellow friends in the Bitcoin space will take their arena and focus on it and do their best job in that space. And I think by each of us getting our own sort of lanes, then we're able to lift up the whole Bitcoin ecosystem. But I mean, having said that, I still go to the main media outlets: CoinDesk, Decrypt, Forbes. Crypto is doing a really fantastic job there to stay on top of the Bitcoin space. But then, and also a lot of Stacker News, a lot of community-led forums and news sites. And then in addition to that, I try and follow on, at least on social media, I try and follow journalists, activists, human rights defenders, lawyers. I'm not sure if I said that already. But yeah, I try and have a balanced view and trying to make sure that I'm getting sort of like two sides of the story and just getting a wide variety of experiences. I think it is being a bit shy when I go into a meetup and or an event or a conference because they tend to be male dominated. So at first I get a bit nervous, but once I get there and I start talking to them, Bitcoiners are some of the nicest and kindest people that you'll meet, and they're so smart and they're so willing to help as well. I think where the greatest challenge for me has been is that I would say, relatively young and new to Bitcoin. And so it's in some ways challenging to get people to care about what I'm trying to say, which is that the Bitcoin is a tool for humanitarian aid. It is a tool that uplifts humanity. It is a tool that liberates people from oppression, because I don't have clout, because I'm not an influencer, because I'm not a successful entrepreneur or an investor, or had dozens of years in the traditional finance industry. And so I think a lot of what I say can get lost because I'm not really because you could say I'm nobody in this space, but I don't mind. I just put my head down and I continue to work and I continue to focus on these stories that I believe need to come to light and need to be shared with the world, because Bitcoin is doing some incredible work with helping liberate people. Oh my gosh, I would say, if you're totally skeptical, I would say check out Andreas Antonopoulos's videos on Bitcoin, just introduction to Bitcoin, or what is Bitcoin, or what does Bitcoin matter. And from there, you can also check out his books, but go down a rabbit hole of the Bitcoin content. Don't listen to mainstream media in this search. Look into Andreas Antonopoulos, and from there, just see what other people that you can learn about. And follow that path. You will be blown away by how fascinating the Bitcoin space is. It is truly, truly mind-blowing. And you're going to find in no time that you've learned about history, and you've learned about economics and human rights and cryptography. You've learned about all these different things, and you'll be smarter for it and better for it. And it will just improve your mental frameworks and your way of relating to the world. Thank you so much. It looks like that was it. I just want to say again a huge thank you to Marcel, and a huge thank you for the work that she's doing in educating women in Africa about Bitcoin. It is so important, and I'm very glad that she's doing it. And I look forward to seeing more women get into the space. And if you are going to commit to being in the Bitcoin space, it's a lifetime work. And if you're going to want to contribute to the space, I will just say that it does feel a bit difficult sometimes and challenging because there's nobody doing this work. We are very early to Bitcoin still. Even though it may not feel like it, we are very early still. And there is space for you to carve out your own path, for you to have your own point of view, and for you to have an impact in the space, but also in humanity. So don't get discouraged, tune out the noise and don't let your insecurities and doubts get in the way. I know they do for me sometimes, but just put my head down and just show up week after week. And you don't know, opportunities might come your way, like they did for me with the Human Rights Foundation. And I look forward to seeing the other wonderful things that will come along as well.
Proudly brought to you by Bitcoin Dada.